talks about how we can build TVET systems for economic transformation. Now, one of the key findings from that report is around the disconnect between the supply of the skills and the type of skills that is coming out of TVET and what industry demands. So today we are going to be tackling how we can make TVET industry ready. What are some of the reforms that we need? What type of curriculums do we need to be looking at? How do we engage employers consistently? And how do we ensure that soft skills, so 21st century skills, are adequately embedded in our TVET systems? So right before I go into my guest today, who is going to be helping me discuss some of these issues, one of my biggest, I'm one of her biggest admirers. She's been doing amazing things in the TVET space in Ghana and beyond. So before I bring my guest in to introduce her, I would like to remind us of some of the features we have. So for our Francophone speakers, we have a function for interpretation. There's an icon, and if you look down on your screen, you will find an icon that gives you interpretation. So we have French interpretation available for that. We also have a Q&A chat function as well. So I would like to encourage our listeners as much as possible to post questions as we go along in the Q&A function, and also keep interacting with each other in the chat box that you have. Right, okay. So that is just a few housekeeping rules we have. And with that said, I'm going to go right into introducing Ms. Constance Elizabeth Swaneker. So it's my pleasure to welcome Constance, who is the founder and president of the Design and Technology Institute, DTI, here in Ghana. Constance is an entrepreneur. She's an industrial designer, a manufacturing leader who transitioned from industry into education reform. Through DTI, she has developed an institution that integrates competency-based technical training, strong employer collaboration, modern equipment, and an intentional focus on professionalism and work readiness. Constance, thank you so much for joining us today. My introduction doesn't do you justice, not even close. I have followed your work for years now, and I am esteemed to have this pleasure of your audience today. So Constance, I will just kick off by allowing you to introduce yourself. I would like to hear more about you and how you got into TVET to begin with. What inspired you? Where was the calling from? So if we can just kick off with having our audience listen in on how you got into TVET to begin with.
Thank you, Mona, and thank you very much for having me here. Interesting question. When did I begin my journey? I think what a lot of parents and educators don't realize is that every young child is different, and your pathway really begins from what talents you possess. And so I would say that my journey into skills started when I was very young, and that's where we begin to see the pathways. I was very fortunate to have an educator as a mother. And so I think from very early on, from probably maybe around age 7, 8, I struggled with math and subject that came very easy to my siblings who were more science and math oriented. I was more creative and talented. And I think, was a transition into secondary when you begin to choose subjects that naturally, whether you are arts oriented or, whether you're going to go into the sciences. So that journey started from really secondary school, where I did more hands-based subjects. So for instance, I did home economics, I did agriculture, I did commerce. I mean, I did very weird in the subjects, but I did art. And I excelled in those things that naturally came to me because it involved using all your senses. And then the pathways also then begins into A levels. What subjects again do you choose, right? But you know, the word TVET, skills education for any parent, was not my child sitting under a tree learning how to sew or to become an apprentice to somebody, because, you know, I came from a middle income family. So the natural thing was, you know, you go through the school system. But the school system also didn't know what to do with young people like myself, right? So I finished A levels and I entered university. Again, I studied art, but you know, I mean, in my time when I graduated about 27 years ago, we were just known as, oh, those artists who sit under the trees. You know, we're not doing social sciences or the sciences. So our mates looked down upon us and they laughed at us. You know, it wasn't considered cool to be a creative then. I found university extremely boring because it was just very academic based. As a creative, we build things and we do things. And so I ended up in a carpentry workshop where I was allowed to explore my creativity. And that's when, for me, the word trade education and learning a trade really exposed me to what it meant to be able to put into practice what I was actually designing, and I could build things. And that's when I fell in love with really the skill trainer. That's when I realized that educators didn't really understand what we meant by skills education. It was either you were going to a technical school for dropouts, but you know, we didn't really have first-class trade schools. And so that sojourn led me to start my own company, Accent and Art, that is will turn 26 years old. And I just thought, I'm not going to go and work in a bank because I'm a creative. And so I started my own business when nobody really understood what to do with young people like myself. It was through, you know, this whole experience working in industry that I recognized that there was a mismatch between academia and industry and what industry required of us. And so everything that I learned was really learning in industry, you know, becoming an apprentice, shadowing engineers and architects and people that I was working with, that it then became my world and school. And then I was working with artisans who had also come from the informal training. And so the factory floor then became the learning ground for both myself as the founder, and then the apprentices that we had also hired to all work towards aligning what industry expected of us, working to some sort of standards and meeting their demands. And that's when I recognized that, you know, nobody had really paid attention to TVET education. But I'd like to go back to our colonial education, our history. You know, our colonial masters, you know, gave us grammar education because most of us, our parents, were trained to be civil servants because that's what they needed at that time. It wasn't in their interest to really build first-class trade schools because remember, they were exploiting us, you know, taking our raw materials away. So there was no value addition, no trade schools, unlike countries like Singapore and Germany, and a lot of schools in developing world, even America at a point in time, were very big on trade and community schools. And I think that's when I realized that, no, how do we as Africans shape our own narrative around localized TVET system? And that is what led me to start Design and Technology Institute, because I felt that having learned throughout my career and growing up, I could see clearly what a young person was missing, what was missing in education, and how I also give my quota back into what a good TVET system would look like. So that's the journey summarized, Mona.
Great, fantastic. And what is striking about your journey, Constance, is that you did not remain in the industry and simply criticize the system, right? It's easy to sit back and criticize, but you took action, you did something, and then you went ahead to build an alternative model, which is DTI. So I want to come to, let's talk a bit about DTI and what you're doing differently there. So let's talk about the curriculums here. So for our listeners, DTI is Design and Technology Institute, which is the institute Constance has founded, doing amazing work in equipping young people with the right skills and the right level of quality of skills needed to thrive in the industry. So Constance, when we're designing DTI's curriculum, what was that one principle you refused to compromise on, right? So what sets your curriculum apart from the many conventional TVET institutes that we have, particularly in Ghana, but even beyond?
So one of the key things that one has to recognize is the skill needs of a country, and labor market information systems, So I would say that Africa is at a point where we're about to, really industrialize. Mind you, I was working in the construction industry, and I specialized in metal fabrication and welding. And that is a critically needed skill in Africa, because that's the bane of industrialization, building stuff, right? And so it was important to look at whether the curriculum was responsive to Ghana's needs at that time. And so when we looked at the curriculum, the first three things was, okay, how do we look at precision welding and fabrication? But this is critically needed in the oil and gas sectors, mining, construction, manufacturing. So this was a huge skill gap that the country had. And then we also looked at design innovation, because design forms the basis of everything. So CAD/CAM, multimedia, and entrepreneurship. We're adding on three new trade areas: industrial plumbing, industrial electricals, and cleaning sciences. So when you look at the curriculum, it really fits into what industry is looking at. We have a huge skills gap. And so for a lot of these highly specialized areas, we have what we call, trying to meet local content. And so a lot of these specialized industries actually have foreign laborers coming in. Oil and gas mining is dominated by the Indians or Filipinos because they're very good welders. But you said something very profound. We didn't compromise on industry's expectations of precision and quality. And so the ethos of everything that we're doing, had to be precise. It had to meet, the expectations of industry. And this is what we found was critically missing. All the roadside welders that we had didn't have these two concepts. So to them, anything was okay. Nobody was talking about standards. Nobody was talking about, what it meant to penetrate into this area that didn't compromise on precision, quality, and being driven by an international standard. So that's what we do at DTI. Our curriculum is all international accredited. In fact, the welding program that we run is accredited by the American Welding Society, and DTI is the first in Africa to be given that accreditation, because our training met that standard. So for us, that was a big breakthrough for the country.
Right. Thanks, Constance. And as I was listening to you, let me take a bit of a detour, because you're a female in a male-dominated field. You're talking metal fabrication, you're talking welding, you're talking places where we don't often find young girls. I just want to take a bit of a detour to ask, what has your experience been like, and what has it been like preparing young girls in your institute in such a male-dominated field?
Very interesting. I love what I do, and I don't see barriers. I don't see ceilings. When it comes to precision, women pay attention to detail. So it was this natural flair that I was bringing to the trade, and the softness in which we're looking at design that made me stand out in the space. And so very quickly, we were known to be producing excellent work, making metal look so soft, very feminine. And so when you look at high precision industries, you actually find a lot of women there, because attention to detail, that's something that comes very naturally to us. We pay attention, we're patient. And so I would say that, my journey into this typically male-dominated areas was actually, backed by male champions. And so that's one thing that I've always said, that it's just being brave enough to cross. But when you do, you actually do find male champions that want to see more women there because of this natural, affinities that come to us. So I think it's an issue of artificial boundaries and barriers that society places on. When you're a woman, you can't do this, you can't do that. But I don't know who says that, they're just, so how do we change perceptions, and how do we socialize parents, and otherwise society that thinks, create these artificial barriers when they're really not.
Great. I still on DTI because I think the work you're doing is phenomenal. And in my years doing this work, it's the first time I've heard the phrase "making metal look soft," and I love it. So just again at DTI, because in the report that we released last year, one of the key things was around the need to tighten collaboration between industry and TVET providers, training providers, right? Because essentially, TVET is focusing on feeding workforce for the labor market, for the industry. So at DTI, how does your collaboration with employers work? What are some of the ways you have done that? If you can just walk us through.
So earlier on, you said that I had transitioned from industry and had, come into education. It works hand in hand. Remember, we're training for industry, and industry are the off-takers. And so typically our program consists of, classroom learning and then working in industry. So we run the dual TVET model where learners transition between the classroom and the factory floor. So currently, for the welding program, Accent and Art serves as the industry partner for the welding program. So there's a busload of students that go every day to the factory floor, depending on your class and the timetable. And they're actually working on real life projects with our artisans, such that the skills transfer and the employability skills is picked up right from when they're in school. When they're done spending 12 months here, we also transition them into 6 months of work experience learning, where it's now just typically working with an industry partner or employee. So we have about 160 industry partners cut across all over different industries. And I'm happy to say that about 70% of our interns are retained in the industries that replace them right after the experience ends. We also run an entrepreneurship program. So when we talk about the pathways into the labor market, we're looking at young people that are, pursuing either wage employment, and those that will go into self-employment. As a typical entrepreneur, I'm very big on entrepreneurship. I've never worked for anybody before. And so, how do we create the enabling environment for young entrepreneurs to thrive? Remember, we're giving you skill sets, valuable skill set that sets you up for life. And whilst we're talking about soft skills, let's not forget that right now there's also the crucial role of soft skills as well. So producing lifelong learners that should be able to thrive in the labor market means that there should be no young person who comes to our institute that, will not be picked up by industry, or would not be able to create their own businesses and being incubated to be able to survive the difficulties of entrepreneurship, that entrepreneurial journey as well.
Great, and I'm glad you brought up soft skills, because that is another area where when we look at TVET, we often forget that regardless of a person's discipline or learning speciality, soft skills are still needed. The communication skills, we still need the critical thinking. We still need to make sure that our young ones have the teamwork, problem solving, all of that. So for my audience that have just joined us, we're speaking to Constance Swanica. She is the founder of DTI. And I know for those who are not in Ghana, a lot of you are wondering, what is DTI? So we have a special video that, thanks to Constance, allowing us to film some of the work that they do to give you insight into what life at DTI looked like. So I'll pause here, I'll pause our conversation, and let's just see what this video tells us.
So before I came to DTI, I attended ATU, Accra University, and I studied building and construction. So comparing that to DTI, I think there's a vast difference in the practicality. Because in DTI, when you are being given something to world, you are being left, after being guided, you are being left alone, and then you do it, and the supervisors come to check it.
Our Ghanaians, we don't really pay much to details, and also we don't follow standards. So I can say TVET is helping to develop students with that necessary skills and also follow duties and also standards. With DTI, we are embarking on initiating precision quality among the students, which help them to be able to work and also give quality works within industries.
After you are being taught how to word and everything, you are being added with a vital soft skill. It could be communication or any other skill. And this one will help you or adapt your value. Oftentimes when maybe you are looking for a job opportunity or anything, the certification you are holding, a lot of people are holding it. But what sets you apart or what makes you different is the soft skill that you have. And DTI impacts that on you.
Most ladies are into a white-collar job. They are afraid of their technical skills, but I think TVET is the best. Not even I think, I know that TVET is the best because you get to gain skills so that you can also practice on your own.
TVET has added value to my hand, and I would say TVET will help my peers to exploit their talents.
TVET has played a vital role in my life in the sense that it has given me a hands-on skill. Everything we do here is in a practical way, and you learn them yourself, and nobody helps you. So anything you learn here is confidential. You know that you can't do it without anybody's help once you are being taught.
So now the world, we are moving on, we are moving forward. More constructions, more buildings. So definitely they will need welders. So I think I'm going to get a job.
I will encourage my peers to try and add values to their hand because TVET is really dominating the world.
Fantastic, and a round of applause, Constance. You have done amazing. It's always heartwarming to interact with your students and just see the way you're transforming lives. And this is the reason why we have this Fireside Chat Series, right? We want to really spotlight some of the innovative work that everyday people like yourself, innovators, are having, and the impact you're having on the ground in the TVET space. And how we can then scale up some of these interventions to ensure that they're benefiting young people, not just on the continent, but beyond. So thanks again, Constance. So let me zoom out from the institutional level. The conversation till now, we've been talking a lot about what you're doing at the institutional level. Now let's come to the broader systems. The policies that we work within. In Ghana's TVET reform, so I'll limit the conversation to Ghana for now. There's a lot of emphasis on competency-based training. We have done a lot of reforms trying to strengthen industry alignment. But from your experience, what policies have genuinely enabled your work? And where do you still see some of these structural bottlenecks that limit us really strengthening our TVET? And so I know we're making the efforts, but what are still those areas that we need to prioritize in the reform space?
So, one of the key things we recognized to really make transformation at scale was to also delve into policy reforms. And so we actually work very closely with our National Development Planning Commission that has the oversight responsibility of about 7 different ministries. That policy reforms allows you to really look at high-level transformation systems at scale. Without the role of private sector, I'm sorry, we're not going anywhere. And so that's something that we've been able to do, encourage industry and all the players in the space to sit together to look at where the gaps are. There's no point sitting on the fence and complaining when you actually will not be part of, reforms. And so if you look at TVET reforms, there's a role that industry plays, even with curriculum, because is it responsive enough? Is it meeting the demands? I mean, have we done a skills forecast? What do you need? And what role do industry players also play? So for instance, we're looking for industry placements for young people. And a lot of the times, industry is actually closing the door to young people. So how do we look at where some of these gaps are? I was in India, and one of the key things is the role that industry plays. A lot of the times, industry would also ask, what's in it for me? So India, like this, had given 5% tax breaks to all industries. And you find that in terms of even assets, because we use a lot of very expensive assets was donated to some of these TVET institutions. Some of the facilitators would come from industry, so there was a very close relationship that we had with industry. Unfortunately, in Africa, our industries are not that, advanced. Cost of doing business is very expensive. So there's still a lot of hostility. So how do we work with governments to make sure that we're bringing industry closer? And that's something that we're really pushing very hard on. The other thing as well, almost all the TVET institutions in Ghana, for instance, are run by the government. DTI is one of the very few privately run TVET schools. And so you see a huge difference between the 450 TVET schools and then the one that we have. So we are serving as what we call a center of excellence. In fact, we've actually been endorsed by the African Union to serve as a Pan-African center of excellence to show what good can look like in all forms, whether it comes to relevance of curriculum, the sort of facilities that we have, end to end. And so I'm very happy to say that we work very closely with the government. We have a great relationship with the Commission for Technical and Vocational Education. And we're helping them look at where the gaps are. And so that's something that, as we deepen the work that we do with government, we hope to see, DTI serving as the North Star and how government also closing, because the government really has the responsibility of transforming TVET systems at scale. We cannot do that, but we can show what good can look like, and they can then in turn see us as the benchmark.
Great, and I like that point you just said, which is that you can demonstrate, you can show what that excellence looks like. And I like that you haven't shied away from engaging at the policy level, that you are working hand in hand with policymakers to try to address some of these issues. And for our audience, especially for those who are also in the TVET space, this is a call to action, actually, that we all do have a role to play in bringing those examples of innovation that we are doing in our little corners and seeing how we can work with governments and policymakers to reform or to take on one reform at a time to see how we bridge this gap. So Constance, you mentioned, obviously in Ghana, we have the government being the largest provider for TVET. But what would it take for elements of the DTI model to be embedded more widely across these public TVET institutions that we have? Are there any low-hanging fruits that we can quickly advocate for government to begin to embed the DTI model?
So fortunately, the endorsement that we had with the African Union also came with support to expand considerably. Currently in Accra, we have 6 campuses, and we are also expanding onto 11 acres on the outskirts of Accra. That would then be a bigger campus, because what we also recognize, it should be a top-up approach. So for instance, one of the key things that we recognized was the absence of, facilitators. Our facilitators all come from industry. But when you go to a lot of these technical institutions, there's a huge mismatch and a gap with the quality of instructors or facilitators that we find. And so we're looking at how we can set up a teacher training academy where we look at the quality of facilitators that are working in some of the schools. Then we're also looking at relevance of curricula. All the curriculum that they're using is completely outmoded. And so helping them to have access to, relevant curricula. And then what we're also helping the government also really consider is collapsing the number of schools that we have and having centers of excellence in strategic places. There's also the poor perception around TVET. And so how do you, use DTI to showcase, for instance, Mona, the documentary that you did, storytelling, because you still have young people who still, don't consider TVET as a viable option. But the reality is that for Africa, TVET is, our future, really. And whilst you look at also the youth dividend, there's also the opportunity to export labor to the aging West. So we really don't have an option, but to really look at how we quickly can close some of these gaps. And so this is where DTI sits as a Pan-African Center of Excellence, because mind you, whatever is happening in Ghana is not peculiar to Ghana alone, but it transcends to a number of African countries. Apart from Africa south of Sahara, we all have the same issues when it comes to gaps around TVET education.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder to our audience that we do have interpretation available. There is an interpretation icon below on your screen. So for our Francophone audience, we do have French translation available. So Constance, still on the policy aspect. So in our work in policy engagement at ASSET, we engage a lot of policymakers through, for example, the PACT, which is the Pan-African Coalition for Transformation, where we work hand in hand with key stakeholders to push for reforms in key aspects of our economy. And at the YES program, the Youth Employment and Skills, we've been working over the last few years around secondary education and TVET. Now, one of the questions that we keep getting asked is around prioritization, right? Because governments are often overwhelmed and they don't know where to start from, or often like we have limited resources. Where do we even start from? So what is that one? I know this is a heavy question, but if you could, or if you had the opportunity to say, let us prioritize this one reform to start with in bridging this gap between training and what the industry is looking for, what would it be?
What would that be? I think just being bold enough to tackle issues, because sometimes I find that there's a lot of talk shop. And one of the key things that I always say that there's the urgency at which we're seen to be, really driving the changes that we want to see. Recently in Ghana, we had, I'm not sure whether it made international news, but when there was a call for young people to enlist in the army, we saw the number of young people that applied for slots that, over 100,000 applications when we only had 5,000 slots, and there was a huge stampede. Recently, we also had, the terrorist attack just next door in Burkina. So every day you wake up, we also have the issue around artisanal mining. And so when you look at how fast policy reforms should take place, it's a little worrying for us in industry, because industry doesn't wait for the public sector. We're so nimble, we're responsive. So how do we get the public sector to work with us at the same level of urgency to work towards tackling a very urgent crisis? If you look at what happened recently in Nepal, Madagascar, Sri Lanka, for wherever you find, restless Gen Z, how do we quickly also meet the demands of the gaps that we're seeing in the labor market? So while there's huge opportunities, recently I was just talking to our Minister for Youth Development and Empowerment, and he said that he had toured some European factories with our labor ministry, and a lot of the factories were shut because they couldn't find labor. And he has all these demands for the opportunity for, controlled migration. But the issue was that, the needs of these countries in the West, we were not meeting the sort of standards, training standards that they needed, and the accreditation issues. So my question to you, Mona, is the urgency in which we can get governments and policy reforms to be a bit more nimble. That's where I see the challenges.
Thanks, Constance. And yes, I think, as I said earlier, we do all have a role to play. And we at the policy side, it's a reminder that we need to get moving. We talk a lot. You're not wrong about that. We do talk a lot, but I think that, as you said, I agree with you. Talk is, we've done enough talking, and more action than talk is needed at this point, especially looking at the crisis that is before us, with a lot of young people unemployed, restless. So it's one thing that they're unemployed, but they're restless. They're looking for something to do. They're looking to be productive. They're looking to contribute and not to watch the best of their youthful years being wasted, being idle. So with that said, Constance, my final question to you is to our young audience listening in. As you've said, it isn't always, TVET isn't always attractive. What's that one message to close off with to our young audience around TVET, if you had one message for them?
This is a sector where welders are earning, qualified welders are earning as much as $700 an hour. Yeah.
There you go. That's all you need to say, because I have a couple of Gen Zs on my team, and the money makes them wake up quickly. So there you go.
It's highly lucrative. I have no regrets, taking that bold step to enter in a space that was non-existent, that I had to create that space. And so what I tell my young learners here, nobody owes you anything. The world doesn't owe you anything. But there are opportunities out there that you can go and grab. All the opportunities in the labor market, whether you like it or not, is in TVET. I talked about, we kickstarting our industrialization agenda. There's going to be a construction boom because urbanization is going to be a huge problem in Africa. So when you look at, where the skills forecast would be, and you're not quickly, and I'd like to also say that with the advent of AI, certain jobs that we know will completely disappear. And so if you're not reskilling and upskilling very quickly to where the trends are going, then you're going to be left behind. And so as a young person, you know, you are in this seat where there's this need for us to start thinking, reskilling and upskilling and transitioning into labor markets very quickly. That's your reality.
Fantastic. You're giving us a lot to unpack. And it's been an exciting conversation. I'm sure our audience are eager to ask you a couple of questions. So I'm going to pause here and open the floor. So as I said earlier, we did get a few questions in. So I will kick off by calling in Obed. If Obed is here with us. Obed, you had a question for Constance. And after Obed's question, because what I would like to do is take at least two and then bring Constance in. After Obed comes in, Louis Pimdaku from Amnesty International. You also did have a question. So after Obed, then you can come in to ask your question. In the meantime, I will encourage you using our Q&A option to pop in any questions that you have, and I can read this for Constance to take. So Obed, if you can hear me, go ahead with your question.
Hi, please, good day to you all. Please, am I clear enough?
Yes, we can hear you, Obed.
All right, so I followed this conversation keenly. I'm very glad having you all on board and listening to this insight from you. It's very educative, and then I've learned a lot. But then I'd like to ask this. Anyway, I am Obed from Ghana. I'm a student. Yes. So I would like to ask this question. So, Constance, please, for young people who do not have access to well-equipped institutions, what can they do individually to strengthen their work readiness? So this is a very short question, but then I hope you go further for me to understand and provide the insight that I need. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Obed. I'll take another question before I let Constance come in. Louis.
Hello, please can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, I think I've really enjoyed the discussion so far. My name is Lois, and I'm a youth who's also keenly interested in TVET as well. And I'd like to have a very simple question for Constance to answer. So I think I did some research and I realized that coming down the years from 2020, there's been a great surge in the number of recruitment into TVET institutions, but then it seems that the percentage of females is quite low. It peaks up in terms of hospitality and fashion design, but when it comes to the technical fields that DTI majors in, there's a low percentage of females in there. So my question to Constance is that as a young girl coming up, what are some of the avenues that are available to help achieve success in such technical and industrial fields that are often male dominated? That would be my question. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Louis. And Louis, I'd like to add on to your question for Constance. So Constance, also, I think at the policy level, what are some of the things we can also be doing or advocating for to get a lot more girls into this male-dominated fields? Are there things we can do at the primary level even before they get to secondary education and whatnot? So, and just a reminder, our question from Obed was around for young people who do not necessarily have access to, well-equipped TVET institutes. Are there other pathways for them?
To the young man, that Obed, I studied everything that I know actually on a factory floor. I didn't pick up the skills from university. I would encourage you, if you're a young person, is to attach yourself with, an entrepreneur, an employer, knock on the door and ask, may I come and intern? And I was juggling this whilst I was in university. And so every holiday I was going onto the factory floor, not expecting anything because I knew I was learning. But, I find that for young people these days, it's this mindset, nothing even stops you from finding if you're into engineering, go to, find a mechanic somewhere that does good work, and ask whether you can learn from them. That's actually your learning ground. Mind you, I talked about, the work experience learning where you're actually supposed to learn, in the industry. Assets are very expensive. And so most sophisticated assets that you would find, you wouldn't find them in school. You would actually find them in industry. So that's the ready answer for you there. Go and knock on a door, ask, this is what I want to do, and you'll be surprised at how many doors would open for you. Employers are very willing to, to give young people opportunities to learn. The issue around getting more girls in male-dominated spaces is, for me, the issue of how we're socializing parents, because a lot of the times the gatekeepers are what we find our parents. So a DTI like this, for instance, our welding program is 50% female, 50% male, so that's something that we're very big on. And usually the girls are best in class, because remember I talked earlier about how they pay attention to detail. And so what we're doing is being very deliberate about the storytelling, dispelling, the notion that it's, more geared for males. So what we are doing is, how do we work with the government to make sure that at a national level, the story is amplified? It's only when they see other young, role models that have gone through that you begin to see that it makes it easier for more young girls to come through. So I think it's something that the government has to really champion, how we're telling and amplifying these stories.
Great, thanks. And I think you raised an important point around the role parents play in all of this, because of our lack of, or the inadequate career guidance and counseling services we have in our education system. Guardians and parents tend to take up that role. And so it's important that regardless of what we're doing in advocacy, we are pulling in parents. We're not forgetting parents as a key stakeholder in making some of these decisions or directing where young people go into. I do have, I think there's a comment from Mansa Amankwa. Mansa is just giving you props, Constance. She's an author and she has profiled you in her book. And she knows that through her storytelling, both from fiction and nonfiction, she can include TVET so that children see this as a norm. So I'm spotlighting this comment because, again, you may not necessarily be in TVET, but you do have a role to play in storytelling so that we're seeing this as a norm and encouraging young people into the field. We also have a comment from Fida. Fida is joining us from Sudan. Fida wants to know that, Fida is asking if they want to establish something similar to empower women in her home country. Do you provide training in policy making or any sort of training? So I guess from peer-to-peer practitioners to practitioners, do you have avenue or provide training in that capacity?
When I set up to give back to community, one thing that we said was that, how do we build a Pan-African Center of Excellence? And so the whole notion of what we're doing is, how do we deepen our work? And so our doors is open to, we have quite a lot of delegations coming in from all of Africa just to see the DTI model. So we're very happy to share. We're not for profit. And so that's the main focus of what we do, is deepening impact. So just wanted to put that out there.
Great. So for our listeners and audience out there, DTI is open to sharing their model. They are ready for fellow practitioners who want to understand the work that goes into the work that they do. So please feel free to reach out DTI is actually very responsive across all their social media, LinkedIn as well, so please feel free to reach out. We do have, I'll take this final comment from Sharif. Sharif is from Nigeria, and Sharif is wondering, for young people, I think this is more in terms of entrepreneurship, for young people who cannot wait for government assistance, what are some of the, what advice can you give for such young people to ensure that they are getting the skills they need, but also positioning themselves for employment or to start something on their own?
Yeah, I would like to see young people a bit more hungry. So much opportunity out there. The mindset of resilience. You know, I grew up in a generation where very analog, you know. And so for young people, they have so much that we didn't have. I find that sometimes it doesn't make them as resilient as I would like. I mean, I have two young sons. One is almost 27 and one is 24. They have low businesses because frankly, I tell them that, you know, you're young adults. It's not my responsibility to be looking after you at your age. You know, so how do we get more young people to be hungry? You know, we like to see that drive. And so that's what I would like to see. Opportunities are there, you know, just being confident enough to step up. You'd be surprised at, you know, how the world would embrace you just by that. And so I think this is where the soft skills really comes in. How you speak, how you present, you know, yourself, and all those things that matter are those things that will take you to the next level.
Great. Thank you so much, Constance. I think that was the last question. And I would like to thank all our listeners. I'm just going through the chat here, and it always amazes me when we have these webinars. We've got audience from Nairobi, we've got Malawi, we have got Togo, we've got Uganda, we've got Niger, Nigeria, even Bahrain. We've got Italy, Angola. So it's always heartwarming for myself to see the reach that we have, and this is just those joining us via Zoom. We're also live streaming on our YouTube, and we will be uploading this webinar when we are done, so you can always go back in case there are bits and pieces you missed, or in case you want to share onwards to other young people or stakeholders that you think will benefit. With that said, I have had the pleasure of listening to Constance over the last couple of minutes. I have learned so much from her. Her drive, her resilience, the story of how she has gotten into TVET, and not just folding her arms and waiting for solutions, but taking charge and navigating a space that would have otherwise been deemed as male-dominated, and going on to impact several lives through DTI, and the young people who, as in her own very words, need role models to look up to see that it is possible. So thank you so much, Constance, for your time today. And I'd like to thank our listeners. I would also like to thank the MasterCard Foundation, who are powering the Fireside Chat Series. I just want to also preview what's coming, because this is a series that we're going to be doing. So we have the next one that will come up in April, and we will be having a representative from the AU joining us to tell us about some of the innovation they're doing to harmonize curriculums across the different countries. Some of the problems that we face on the continent when it comes to TVET are not isolated. They cut across several countries. So we'll be having a spokesperson from the AU to give us insights on the amazing work they're doing to try to support member countries across the field of TVET. We will also be having later on in the series another innovator, entrepreneur, North Shore Apparel. For those in Ghana, most of you would have heard of the amazing things they're doing in terms of giving young people the skills that they need and working in scaling up some of their innovations. So we will also be circulating, for those of you who are interested, a call to nomination. If you know any trailblazer in the field of TVET you'd like to recommend, please feel free to do so. With that said, I'll bring our webinar for today to a close. It's been an absolute pleasure. For my colleagues here at ACET, the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, we hope you have found our conversation insightful and useful, and we hope that you will keep interacting with us on our social media platforms. We also have all our resources on our website at assetforafrica.org. So please do check us out. We have our latest report on building TVET systems for economic transformation uploaded over there. And for our young audience, we hope that you have found this inspiring. There is money to be made in TVET. I would like to emphasize that because I know that's the language a lot of our young people understand. There is money to be made in TVET, and we would like to encourage as many of you to spread the word, not just because of the money, but also the future is TVET. If we want to industrialize, if we want to transform our economies, we're going to need a skill set to do that. And the way forward is TVET. So thank you very much. And to the technical team that have made this possible, I appreciate your hard work. And with that said, I bring the webinar to a close. Thank you, Constance, and enjoy the rest of your day, our audience, wherever you're joining.